I read so many great books in 2025, but I have to pick 10 of them. Why? That's the rules of the internet. So these are my 10 favorite books that I read in 2025. Before we get started, you might have noticed there's actually 12 books here. That's because I'm going to do 2 honorable mentions, which is just me cheating so I can have a slightly longer list, because it's really hard to narrow down a list of... I read around 50 books this year, I think 48, 50, something like that. And it's really hard to narrow it down to just 10 because there are so many good ones. So I'm going to give myself 2 honorable mentions that don't quite make the list, but they kind of do. First is The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a phenomenal literary horror historical fiction epistolary novel. This is kind of a story nested within 2 more stories. This is about a woman who finds the journal of her great-great-great-grandfather, who is a priest, and he's detailing his encounters with this Native American man who is a Blackfeet Indian who has a very strange tale with potentially supernatural things happening, and through these journal entries we're learning what happened, and this Native American is telling a story to the priest. And so we kind of go into the woman's story first, and then into her grandfather's written account of what he says happens, and then he is kind of retelling in first person what this Native American man has told him is his story, and it all comes together in such an interesting way. The themes were brilliantly executed. This made me think a lot. Stylistically, this was incredible. Like, Stephen Graham Jones manages to nail multiple different styles in a way that still feels cohesive and comes together. I will say this book is very much not going to be for everybody, which is pretty much always the case with Stephen Graham Jones. People either tend to love or hate him. I really love his stuff, but there are some things about this book that are kind of weird and a little hard to get into at first, and it did take me a little while to catch my stride with the type of storytelling that was happening. And there are times where it's a little difficult to fully visualize or easily understand what this Native American man is recounting because of a lot of the language that he's using. Like, it's very time and place historical. He's using terms from his people and his culture in a way that requires you to like stop and think sometimes and be like, okay, this is referring to this, or like you contextually start to pick things up, and it adds a lot to the immersion and like the historical veracity of the story, but at the same time it makes it a little harder, a little bit more dense at times to get through, so that is a challenge. It's not as hard when we're reading directly from the account of this woman's great-great-grandfather and the point of view of the woman who we start the book with. Those are a little easier to understand, but thematically this book's great. It raises a lot of interesting moral questions and dilemmas, and I think it's one of the most refreshing takes on the idea of a vampire that I've read in a very long time. I kind of thought vampires could not be fully refreshed in a way. Like, they've been done so many times. And that's not to say I don't like a good vampire book. I do. It's just they've never managed to do anything different in a while. And this actually legitimately does some very different things that also make perfect sense with the type of story this is. It's so good. This is brilliant. I loved it. I'm going to make a dedicated review to this at some point, but in the meantime, if you want something historical and a little dense and literary, you should absolutely check this out. My second honorable mention is The Strength of the Few by James Islington. This is the second book in the Hierarchy series. So The Will of the Many blew up a couple years ago when it came out. I really liked that book a lot, and I had high hopes for The Strength of the Few. And I'm pleased to say that this mostly met my expectations, although it's kind of weird because in some ways it exceeded my expectations and in other ways it didn't meet them. This book is very different. It goes kind of all in on the twist that happens at the end of book 1. Like, book 1 sets up some really interesting things, and then there are some revelations at the end of that book that totally change your understanding of what the story is and what's happening. And I'm glad that this really like doubles down on, okay, we are taking this left turn that was set up at the end of the last book for better and worse. And I think for better, this is one of the most ambitious fantasy sequels I've read in a long time. This expands the world in such an interesting way and kind of a different, there's a different approach to how the world building is expanded in this book that I can't get into without spoilers, but I thought that was fascinating and pretty well done. However, the downside is that because of the way this expanded and because of what we are now trying to grapple with, I don't think we got enough time with the various different point of views and storylines. And so a lot is thrown at you, and I'm fine with that to some extent, but the problem I had is that I wasn't always emotionally resonating with every point of view character or with all of the side characters in a given plot line, section of the book, section of the new expanded world. Didn't always land as much as I wanted. That being said, the epicness of what is happening, the way this ties up at the end, some of the things that happen by the end of it all made this really compelling. I'm super excited for the next book. James Islington has some of the most ambitious plotting that I've ever read in fantasy. And I think he can kind of go toe to toe with Sanderson in terms of the way he plays with your expectations and then just goes wild. And it's pretty cool. So I like that a lot. I wish there was more emotional resonance, but to be fair, that was a bit of a critique I had with the first book. That's not really why I read Islington at this point. Like, I read him for crazy interesting plots and world building. And that's not to say I didn't like the characters. I did, and there were some side characters that grew on me. And by the end of this, like, I definitely cared about some of the characters, but it's not like a character-forward book by any means. So if you really value character, like great character work, which I do, that's probably going to be noticeable here. But I think you should read it. This is still really cool, and I'm fascinated to see what happens in the third book of this. All right, with that, let's get into my actual top 10 of 2025, starting with my 10th favorite book of the year, which is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This is sort of a loose retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And so this is the story of a young man growing up in the mid to late 90s in the Appalachian Mountains in America in a very poverty-stricken area. He's from a poor family, and this deals with the foster care system and addiction and socioeconomic problems related to poverty and just what that does to families and to children. And so obviously this is like kind of heartbreaking, but it's also hopeful because our point of view character, whose name is Demon Copperhead, like that's actually his name, which sounds like kind of ridiculous, but it sort of works. Like by the end of the book, it was working for me. I think one of the things that is so impressive about this book is just Kingsolver has such a strong ability with her voice of this character. Like Demon Copperhead is this real person to me, and when I read him, he's this like kind of southern Appalachian country boy, and you feel that, and he's not well educated, but he's smart in his own way, and that all comes through so brilliantly. And just the way Kingsolver writes him, it's just one of the strongest like character in someone's head that I've had in a while. Like you really just inhabit Demon Copperhead in the best way. And so again, I said already, this is about his life growing up, and he deals with poverty, and he deals with family issues. He deals with abusive, he deals with abusive people in his life. He deals with all sorts of horrors that no child should ever have to face, that no human should ever have to face, but especially children. And this kind of shows his life as he tries to find his way, and he tries to build a life for himself despite everything in the world that is so stacked against him. And I think what keeps you going through this novel, besides the really strong sense of character and voice, is just that hope that he will overcome all of these things that have been so unfairly thrust upon him, and you're not sure if he will. That's the real tragedy, is through this, like, he has his wins and he has his ups, and then he has his downs, he has his failures, and it's heartbreaking to go through those cycles again and again of like thinking we've made progress and then it comes crashing down. So I won't say how this ends, obviously. You should go read it and figure out. But I will say this is a tragic book, a heartbreaking book. There is some hope in this book. And I thought it was just beautifully written and it was captivating. And yeah, that's why it's on this list. In ninth place, we have Kindred by Octavia Butler. She wrote Parable of the Sower, which is another sci-fi book of hers that I really loved. And Kindred was also incredible. This is about a young black woman named Dana who lives in California in the 1970s, but she somehow magically becomes transported to antebellum era Maryland. And she is on a slave plantation, and there's a kid who is going to die, and so she has to decide if she's going to save him. And she finds out he's the plantation owner's son. And then she starts to get transported back and forth between her time and antebellum era Maryland. And she comes to realize that this kid who keeps getting into trouble is like her great-great-great-grandfather or whatever. And so she's now in this weird place where she has to decide, do I help a plantation owner's son who will go on to become a plantation and slave owner himself? But if I don't, like, he's my ancestor, so I might not exist. So it's this weird kind of time-bendy moral quandary she finds herself in. And then this is also just thrilling and intense. Like this reads like a thriller. I think I read this in 2 days, maybe one. I could not put this down. I was just turning the pages to find out what's going to happen, because right from the get-go it sets it up in a way where you're like, dang, this is pretty intense. And obviously being a black person in antebellum era America is not a good thing. Like you're dealing with slavery and like incredibly violent institutional racism. And so she finds herself in this precarious situation where she has to try and like save her ancestor and find a way to keep getting teleported back. She has to kind of figure out how does she stop this from happening and return to her own time. And it's just intense and brilliant, and the themes are really interesting of like what it means for people to have various preconceived notions depending on when they were alive, or I don't want to spoil anything, but there is one character who eventually goes back in time with her and lives in this other era for a while, and you see how this other character becomes a bit shaped by some of the norms and things of what he becomes accustomed to. It's really good. This is a great book. Not super long. Like I said, it's a thriller pretty much. So I think you could burn through this easily. And Octavia Butler is one of the best. Check it out. In 8th place, we have King Sorrow by Joe Hill. Joe Hill is one of my favorite horror authors. I actually made a video recently about where to start with his books. This is his most recent. It's like 900 pages, and it's so good. It's about a group of college students who find this arcane old book that allows them to summon a dragon. But when they do, it forces them to kind of enter this magical contract where once a year they have to choose someone for the dragon to kill. Otherwise, it will start to kill them. And so it's this Faustian bargain that they strike with this dragon. And this is partly interesting because it's kind of a coming-of-age story, so we get to see these college students throughout decades of their lives as they grow up and become adults, and they go their different ways and have different viewpoints on how things should be. But it's also really interesting because we get to see how people think about the power they've been entrusted with. Like, if you can just have someone killed every year, who are you to decide who that should be? And some of them feel like, well, we'll pick bad people. It's pretty easy to find bad people in the world that deserve to be killed. But some of them also feel like we're just perpetuating a cycle of violence, and we shouldn't be the arbiters of these things. So, maybe we should try and find a way to end this dragon and get ourselves out of this predicament. And it's great. But ultimately, I think what makes it so good is just the character work. Like, the characters in this, like I said, we follow them through the decades. It's kind of like an epic saga of like their lives, and we get to see them grow and change. And you have some characters who you come to really love, and some characters you come to hate. And it sucks because they all were friends. And so there's this tension of like people growing apart and changing in realistic ways, but also understanding why some people change and become the way they do. And it's so good. And the resolution's great. There's also a lot of Arthurian elements to this, which is cool. This kind of reads like an urban fantasy, a modern day urban fantasy, as well as a bit of a horror novel. So it's kind of a mixed genre thing going on here. But I will say, if you love Stephen King, I think you'll love Joe Hill. Joe Hill's his son, but beyond obviously the actual blood relation, like Joe Hill stylistically is a lot like King, and he's capable too. Like, I think he is starting to give King a run for his money on like character work and plot and all of these things. This was a ton of fun. There's some crazy good set pieces with the dragon that I just loved and will forever be in my brain. So you should check it out. King Sorrow by Joe Hill, a ton of fun. And if you want to try other Joe Hill books, go watch my previous video where I talk about that. In 7th place, we have Stoner by John Williams. I've heard a lot of people describe this as a book about nothing, which sounds like the Seinfeld joke where it's a show about nothing. I think that does this a disservice. I continue to say that because this ultimately, it's a book about the mundane. And I think that's different. Like, I understand why people say it's about nothing because it's kind of like, it's kind of a zinger to just say that, but like the mundane is actually an important part of everyone's lives. Like, not every moment is this grand, crazy thing. And a lot of our lives are normal people lives. Like, not all of us go on to conquer nations, like most lives are small, contained things that impact a certain number of people in a certain region. And that's that. And this kind of recognizes the mundanity of life, but also highlights the poignancy of that. And that I don't know that you need to be some great, well-known person for your life to matter. And even if you're kind of boring in some ways, like there's still interesting things about you. That's the thing. Like this follows a man named William Stoner, who grows up in the late 1800s, early 1900s on a farm in Missouri, and his parents decide to send him to school to learn more about agriculture so that he can come back to the farm and better help them. But when he goes to college, he falls in love with literature and teaching and poetry, and he decides to stay at the university and become a teacher himself. And it kind of looks at how often what our parents and what people in life is not the way things go, is not what we want out of our lives. And as we make choices and go through the various steps in life, whether it's college, getting a new job, starting a career, starting a family, getting married, having a kid, and going to work, and all of these things, our lives kind of stack up in this way where it doesn't always go exactly as you expect. And also sometimes you kind of become trapped by your various responsibilities, by your various preconceived notions. And you see that a little bit with Stoner. Like in some ways he kind of feels trapped by his life, but his life is just what it is, like he chooses the things he chooses. Like he could potentially choose different things, and he doesn't always do that. And so I don't know, this is a thought-provoking book because it makes you think about what it means to live a mundane, simple life, but also what it means to have agency in your own life and take action for the things you feel are important to you, and for how you interact with people in the world. And I thought this was beautiful and thoughtful. Some people have messaged me saying how much they hate this, so I don't know if you'll like it or not, but I liked it. My sixth favorite read of 2025 is The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. This is a collection of short stories, which I'm kind of surprised that a short story collection is on here. I don't read a ton of short fiction, but Ken Liu is quickly just becoming one of my favorite authors, I think. He has this amazing ability to give a ton of emotional resonance and impact in a short page count, which is funny because the first book of his that I read and loved was The Grace of Kings, which is like a huge fantasy book. But Grace of Kings is kind of a macro view of this epic fantasy conflict that has a bunch of vignettes of a bunch of characters spanning across these various kingdoms. And so in a way, I think Grace of Kings sort of is like a short story collection in one big trench coat of an epic fantasy novel. And I think we're seeing his ability here to do that again, where he will take a short number of pages and deliver emotional impact and all sorts of really interesting ideas too. Ken Liu's also very tapped into like interesting technological concepts, and he does a good job of making them feel plausible. Like he will sometimes cite his sources even of like, he'll be looking at some technology concept that is being researched or has been researched, and then he'll extrapolate off of that to make a story. But yeah, a lot of the stories in here, there's some are sci-fi, some are fantasy, there's a couple that are more like historical fiction. Almost all of them are incredible. And the ones that aren't incredible are still good, I think. Like, they will make you think about what it means for technology and people to grow and change. They will make you think about things people have gone through in history and the way things might go for us as a species. And it'll ground you in these brief character moments that makes your heart just break at the end of a story when the other shoe drops. He's good at setting up a story and then the other shoe drops. And sometimes you see it coming, sometimes you don't, but it's pretty much always impactful. So if you want to try some short stories, also I think if you like Black Mirror, some of his stories sometimes feel just a little bit like that, but he's so good, and there's a reason that a short story collection is this high on my top 10 list, and that's because it's good. My fifth favorite read of 2025 is The Tyranny of Faith by Richard Swan. This is the second book in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. I read the whole trilogy this year, actually, and honestly, this is just kind of like a substitute for the whole trilogy being on this list, but I guess I didn't go over my rules at the beginning, which is mainly that I'm only going to do one book per series and like try and keep it to one author as well. And that for the most part wasn't an issue, but yeah, the whole series is great. But this is my favorite of the series, the second book in the Empire of the Wolf. This follows a man named Sir Conrad von Valt, who is an emperor's justice. So one of the most powerful people in the empire. He has special abilities imbued by the emperor, like the emperor's voice, which allows von Valt to magically command people to tell the truth. He can also raise the dead and like talk to corpses for a certain period of time after they die to try and learn, what they remember from when they died, which helps him with investigations and stuff. Ultimately, an emperor's justice is kind of like a mix between a detective, a lawman, a lawyer, a sorcerer, an executioner. Like, he's a powerful guy. all mixed up in the legal stuff and the justice system of this empire. And this story actually is told through the perspective of Helena, who is a young woman who is the clerk of Conrad von Valt, which is cool because von Valt is kind of this near mythical figure in the empire. Like, he is one of the greatest men alive, according to a lot of people. And so we get to see that filtered through this young woman's perspective as someone who loves and fears and respects and adores and at times is chafed by him. She has kind of a complicated relationship as his student and, not quite a father-daughter dynamic. And there's they have a complicated relationship. And so it's a really interesting way to learn about this great man and see him in action, but also see the dynamics that Helena brings to the table. It's a really great story. And it's kind of a detective story too. Like, these are like mysteries that were unfolding, like conspiracies in the empire that they have to track down and use necromancy and the emperor's voice to try and figure out what's going on. And then there's a ton of like eldritch Lovecraftian horror behind the scenes that's happening. Like, this is a really dark fantasy world. Something that I want more of is like horror in my fantasy. This is one of the best horror fantasy worlds that I've read ever. It's so cool. Again, the eldritch, creepy, unknowable stuff that is kind of behind the scenes is so fun and interesting. And we get to see like von Valt and Helena investigate and uncover these dark workings that are looking to bring down the Empire of the Wolf. So super good stuff. The character work is great. The banter and the dialogue is really good. Honestly, Richard Swan is very underrated, in my opinion. Like, people know about him somewhat, but I think he's up there with some of the better fantasy authors of the past, like, 5-10 years. Like, he's really good. So do yourself a favor, pick up The Empire of the Wolf. It starts with The Justice of Kings. This is the second book, which is my favorite in the trilogy, but the whole trilogy is worth reading. I just love these. In fourth place, we have Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake, more specifically Titus Groan, which is the first book in the Gormenghast trilogy. I haven't read the second two yet. This is a weird series, and I don't fully know how to talk about it. It is a gothic work from the 1950s, set in this like sprawling labyrinthine castle city that is so big and so ancient at this point that many of its citizens never even leave the borders of Gormenghast. They spend their entire lives in this maze of turrets and spires and just this dark gothic city realm that they live in. And this story follows the Groan family, who are the rulers of Gormenghast, and Titus is the newest heir, the son who is born at the beginning of this book. Although the first book really more follows a bunch of other characters, kind of tangential to the Groan family, like the butler and like a young kitchen boy and just a variety of wacky characters. And we get to see, we really are just living in this weird gothic dark castle world. And that's the best way I can describe this, is that this is some of the best ambiance that I've ever read. This is so immersive. You just feel like you're wandering this dark city with these wild, wacky characters and taking in the sights and the sounds. This is a little less of a plot story, I feel like. It's more of an experience. And so mileage is going to vary for you, but if it's the type of book for you, it'll probably be one of the best things you've ever read. It's hard to know where to rank it, because in some ways I'm like, this is so special and unique, and definitely like one of the best pieces of literature I think I've read. But it's also so weird, I kind of don't know what to do with it, but I absolutely adored it. I'm a big fan of like an experience when I'm reading. I'm a huge fan of immersion. The prose and the writing style is not going to be for everybody, but it's very over the top and kind of flowery. And you could almost call it purple, except that Mervyn Peake is a master with language. Like, he is in full control of these wild, elaborate sentences and descriptions he's giving you. So it's hard to call it like purple because of that. But if you don't love super descriptive stuff, this might be a little hard. I will say though, this is not descriptive like anything you've probably read. It's the way he writes is so weird. So Mervyn Peake was a painter before he wrote this book. And you really get this sense that he is just like, each phrase, each sentence is like these brush strokes of him like detailing a whole scene in a very different way. It gives his writing a totally different flavor than pretty much any other author I've ever read. And he paints these wild pictures in your mind through the strangest descriptions. But because of that, it's so memorable. Like some of his descriptions, there's this one scene where you're getting introduced to this kind of gross cook in the kitchen, and he's got this big nose, and it describes his nose as like the mast of a ship, and this cook is like drunk and he passes out, and it just kind of details like the mast of the ship falling, and it's just this weird imagery that is just stuck in my head that made it such a unique reading experience. It was so fun and so weird. This is kind of a fever dream too. Like it's a little unsettling at times, but I just loved it. It's very much something that's up my alley. Again, I don't know if this will work for you. I'll make a longer review at some point, and you should watch other reviews to see if it's the type of thing for you, but it is truly one of the most unique and special reading experiences I've ever read. I love Titus Groan. I love Gormenghast. I'm excited to continue it. There's a reason this is lauded the way it is, but it's also just very strange. And it's also strange that this came out, I think, a little before Lord of the Rings, or right around Lord of the Rings. Kind of weird to have another masterwork of fantasy right from that era. One that, for me, flew under the radar for a long time. Like I didn't become aware of Gormenghast until fairly recently, so I'm glad to be aware of it, and I'm glad to have lost myself in the dark, labyrinthine corridors and alleyways of this crazy city. In third place, we have Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read Never Let Me Go a year or two ago. I really liked it, but this book I liked a lot better. This has made me a huge fan of Ishiguro, like to the point where now I'm like, yeah, I need to read everything he's written. It was that good. This is about an artificial friend named Clara. An artificial friend is like an AI android robot companion that you can buy. Mostly, more, it seems like wealthier families tend to be the ones who buy them. And you can buy an AF to be like a friend to your kid and help around the house and do chores. And overall, they're just kind of like a companion. But what makes this book particularly interesting is that it's told entirely through the eyes of and the thoughts of Clara. You're in Clara's head. And because she's not human, that changes the reading experience a lot. And in some ways, you get a spark of humanity from her. Like she is deeply observant and curious about people and the way they interact and the world around her. And she cares, and she kind of has her own hopes and dreams about what she might do. But all of this is still limited by her programming and overall her need to just execute her function of being an artificial friend. And so in some ways, you keep bumping up against this limitation she has of like, she was designed for this purpose, and that's the purpose she's doing. And so she doesn't fully feel human for that reason, because she is not. She doesn't have the agency a human has. But at times there are moments where you feel like maybe she could. And that tension is interesting in and of itself. But then also, because she's not really human, she's observing humanity very neutrally, very analytically, and often like incorrectly, often in a way that is like sort of surface level incorrect about why people are doing things. But she will sometimes strike on like these deeper, more poignant truths about humanity, sort of unintentionally, because she has this childlike innocence of just, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's just trying to observe and do her best in the situation she's in. And that is just great because it allows us to look at what it means to be human. And that sounds kind of cliche, and that's a trope I've seen done before, but it's done expertly here by Ishiguro. Like, you really get to look at the way we act as humans through this lens that kind of removes it a little bit. And you get to see things like why, Clara will wonder why people say one thing and then do another, or why they'll say they're okay, but their actions show that they're upset or they're hurting or whatever. And she has to try and piece together what people are doing. And it's really relatable because like sometimes as people, you'll have a friend or a family member or a partner say they're okay, but you can tell something's wrong. But because of like your history and your context together, you can't always just get straight to the point about what you actually feel or mean. Sometimes as people, we don't even know what we actually feel or mean, and so we think we're saying something true, but underneath the surface something else is going on and we don't even realize it. And so it's cool to see Clara observe and like analyze these types of patterns and behaviors in people. And then this also has some interesting plot developments. Like, this is more of a literary kind of character-based book. However, there is some plot progression that happens, and there was a moment in the plot that kind of took me by surprise. And gave me some big questions that tie into the overall themes of the novel. And this book also has really cool world building that is so deftly done, so subtly done. Ishiguro has just the lightest, deftest touch when it comes to his world building. He doesn't straight up tell you things. Mostly you hear things as context, or contextually. And Clara doesn't really understand a lot of things, and so it's lost on her, but you will sometimes start to pick up on what's going on. And at time, and that will fill you in on, oh, this actually is how the world is working right now. Or here's maybe like a way the world works in the background that is actually really interesting or concerning. But Clara doesn't understand it or know about it. We're just kind of picking it up contextually. It feels a little bit like when you were a kid and your parents were downstairs in the kitchen talking about something serious and you wanted to know what it was, so you eavesdrop, and you're like, maybe you're on the stairs looking through the banisters and trying not to get noticed, and you don't understand everything that your parents are saying. It's kind of going over your head, but you'll pick up little things here and there about they're talking about so-and-so or whatever. This book often feels like that. And I think that's really cool because it's like the discovery of a story, the discovery of characters and themes in a way that feels earned, and just, it feels like some of the most natural storytelling I've read in a long time. I could gush about this forever, but Clara and the Sun was a beautiful, brilliant book, not very long either. So I'm excited to get to more Ishiguro in 2026 because this was great. And now, finally, we're down to the top 2 books that I read this year. This was tough. I've gone back and forth about which should be in the top spot. Ultimately, it doesn't matter, but I agonized over this for a while. But I think I've landed on something I'm happy with, and ultimately these books are good enough that I would be happy with either of them in the top spot. That being said, my second favorite book of the year was Demon in White by Christopher Ruocchio. This is the 3rd book in the Sun Eater series, and this is the book that made me realize that Sun Eater is probably going to be like an all-time favorite series. I don't know exactly where in the ranking, but Sun Eater, this is broken into a favorite series because of this book. Howling Dark was really good too, but this book end to end was just like perfect for what it is. It's epic, space opera, science fantasy. We're following Hadrian Marlowe. He really kind of grows into his legend in this book. Like, we start to really see Hadrian accomplish and do things that feel like the person he's said that he is in the earlier books. We're really seeing him become that person now in Demon in White. This has some of the best action sequences, really cool, fight scenes and set pieces. This has great political intrigue, like Hadrian goes to kind of the imperial capital, and we're dealing with the emperor and his sons and the politics. We go and explore secrets of the universe in this. We get some crazy lore drops about the history of Earth and about the history of the universe and what other things might lie beyond our knowledge of space and time. Like, some of the lore in this book is the coolest stuff. Like, Ruocchio has such cool world building that I just loved everything we got in this. And then this has some monumental sequences at the end of the book that were just epic and exciting and nail-bitingly tense, and the characters really came into their own in this. I feel like I've liked the characters, but this is the book where I really fell in love with multiple characters beyond just Hadrian. And then now I'm worried because, like, who's gonna survive? Who's gonna make it through this series? It's so good. This was so much fun. It lays the groundwork. I'm heading into book 6. This lays the groundwork in such a great way for what the series ultimately becomes. And I've loved all of the books since then as well, but I still think this is my favorite of the series so far. We'll see if book 7 changes that. A lot of people have Shadows Upon Time as their favorite Sun Eater book. I probably won't get to that until January or February, but I'm working on it. And Demon in White, one of the best things I read in 2025. So good, so much fun. If you're struggling with books 1 or 2 of Sun Eater, I implore you to keep going until the end of book 2. Now, I'm not saying those books are bad. I still thought they were good. But if you kind of like them, but you're not fully sold, keep going. Because they get so incredible. I had a blast. This was very much the year of Sun Eater for me, and I'm so happy about that. And finally, my favorite book of 2025, Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This is the 3rd book in the Live Ship Traders series. Oh, Robin Hobb is so good. Ultimately, like I said, this and Demon in White are both like kind of neck and neck for me, but what really gives this the edge is just Robin Hobb's stunning character work. Her character work is second to none in this book and in general, but the character arcs between book 1 and book 3 of The Liveship Traders is mind-blowing. There are characters that I despise in book 1 that I love at the end of this book, and in a way that's so natural and so realistic and so earned. Robin Hobb shows how people grow and change. There are also characters I hate by the end of this book, for sure. And we have hateable characters who are complex and whatever, but also like we have like some bad guys that they're just bad. Like we learn why and we get the depth of humanity to them, but they're also just bad people. And so there are so many characters that are just so interesting to follow in this book. And ultimately, I think that's my favorite aspect of reading. Like I love world, plot, setting, prose, all, ambiance, all these different things, but ultimately this emotional resonance with characters is usually what it leaves the strongest impression on me in a book, and that's what this did. This is probably the best book I've read by Robin Hobb so far, and she's one of my top 2 or 3 authors of all time. She's so good. The character work is stunning. I can't say too much else because I don't want to spoil where they go, but it's just, she lays this character work brick by brick throughout, a couple thousand pages, and it's immaculate. The plot and the world building is also really good in this, though. Like the resolution of this story is so earned and heartbreaking and powerful, and it's just everything. Her fantasy world is so good. The live ships are these magical ships that are like sentient, and that's so much fun. And it's just some of the best like high fantasy setting you'll ever read, with some of the best character work, not just in fantasy. I think some of the best character work in literature. That paired with an amazing fantasy world. And then Robin Hobb has some of the best prose in the game, I think, too. Like her prose is a little understated, especially compared to someone like Mervyn Peake or Christopher Ruocchio, who are a little bit more stylistic and over the top. She's a bit more restrained, but her words are perfect, and she is incredibly good at giving you poignant, simple thoughts in a beautiful, compelling way as you read the pages of her books. They're so good. I can't recommend Robin Hobb enough. I think Robin Hobb has been my top book of the year for a couple of years now. She's one of the best, truly. So if you haven't read The Realm of the Elderlings, you should do so. I'd recommend you start with the Farseer trilogy, Assassin's Apprentice. There's a whole diagram that I'll post it, but there's a whole diagram of like the sequence to read The Realm of the Elderlings. Technically, you can read the Liveship Traders on their own. I still recommend reading the whole thing, but either way, Ship of Destiny, best book I've read this year. Robin Hobb is truly one of the greatest fantasy authors of the past century. So there you have it. Those were the 10 best books that I read in 2025, plus 2 honorable mentions. I had a great reading year, and even though I always feel like I'm going to read more than I end up reading, I was hoping to read like 100 books. I think I got to about 50, but that's okay because a lot of the books I read were just spectacular. These especially, I read them. I recommend all of them. They're so good. I'm so glad I read them, and I'm excited to head into 2026 because I think there's a lot more good reads ahead of me. But let me know in the comments, what was your favorite book that you read in 2025? Do you have a new favorite author, a new favorite series, or what are you most excited to read heading into 2026? I would love to hear all of that in the comments. But as always, thanks for tuning in and hanging out, talking about books, and I'll see you in 2026.